Welcome to the IEU's virtual side event for B.26, focusing on its independent evaluation of the GCF Simplified Approval Process, or SAP, pilot scheme. I am Yeonji Kim, and I am Communications and Editing Associate at the IEU, and I have the pleasure of hosting and moderating today's talk. Next slide, please, Cortland. So, as many of you know, the IEU completed its evaluation of the SAP pilot scheme in June, and the final evaluation report has been available on our website. So if you follow that link, our final report is available, and the IEU will be making these communications products available online as well, including the GVAL brief, GVAL note, and evidence tree that are designed to show you the main findings and recommendations in a visually effective way. So you could get a look at these things, and you will see what are the main takeaways from this evaluation are. All right, next. Before we start, let me go over some housekeeping rules. When you are not speaking, please kindly mute yourselves. So use the mute button now if you haven't done so. And then we will be getting your questions throughout the seminar, the side event, via the chat box. So please feel free to write your questions already as the talk is taking place. And both during and after the side event, you can tweet about this event on Twitter by using the handle GCF_eval and the hashtag IEUB26. Let me briefly go over today's program. We will first start off with a presentation by Dr. Joe Puri, the head of the IEU, on the findings and recommendations of the SAP evaluation. And then we will do a brief panel discussion, and I will introduce the panelists in a bit. And the panel discussion will be followed by an open Q&A towards the end of this program. So now I have the privilege of introducing to you our fabulous panelists. First off, we have Dr. Joe Puri, the head of the IEU. And then we have Mr. Prudencio Collado, who is the head of Environmental Program and Management at the Land Bank of the Philippines. The Land Bank is an accredited entity to the GCF, and it has a SAP project approved by the GCF board in 2019. The project is SAP 010. And we are going to hear more about this project later from Mr. Collado. And then we have Mr. Demetrio Innocenti, manager of the SAP at the GCF Secretariat. And I hear that we are joined by two of the SAP team members from the Secretariat, Catherine Bryson and Rocio Vizuet. So welcome, and thank you very much for joining us. Next. Oh, well, okay, so now I'm gonna give the floor to Dr. Joe Puri, who will tell us about the key findings and recommendations of the SAP evaluation. So Joe, over to you.
Thank you, Ranji. Really a pleasure for me to be here. I'm gonna just share my screen, and if you could let me know if you can see it, I'd appreciate it. So can you see my screen? And can you see it in slide mode?
Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
Perfect. Okay. Well, good evening. Good evening to everyone who's from Songdo in Korea, and to everyone else, good morning, good afternoon. I'm presuming that you're basically in time zones that are before Songdo, right? I'm very proud to present on behalf of the SAP team, and as well as the Independent Evaluation Unit, the Independent Assessment of GCF Simplified Approval Process, or SAP. And I'm going to be talking about key recommendations, but also a few of the findings, as Yeonji said as well. I'm Joe, and I head the Independent Evaluation Unit, and welcome again on behalf of Yeonji, myself, and everyone else at the IEU to our second B.26 side event. I should plug very quickly for the first one that we did host 2 days ago, which was our side event on accreditation. And if you did get a chance to catch it, we also invite you to look at our recorded version of that side event. We'll also be recording this, this side event. So to move into this very, very quickly, for all of those who are new, SAP at a glance. So the simplified approval process as a modality was approved at B18, at the 18th meeting of the board, by a decision, which basically said that we need a modality that allows projects that are ready for scaling up, require a contribution of less than or equal to $10 million, and are in low impact ESS categories. So environmental and social safeguard categories are low. That means they have a low impact on the environment and are hopefully socially benign as well. And so ESS category C or I3. Yeah. So that's just a very quick version of what was said to be projects or investments that are going to be eligible for SAP. The IEU's independent assessment of the SAP was approved by a decision of the board at the 24th meeting of the board, yeah? As part of its overall work plan. We divided this into 2 phases, and I'm really privileged to also have Demetrio as part of our panel today, because I think it'll make for a really nice conversation as well. But the first phase of our assessment was really to undertake an initial assessment of a review that was undertaken by the Secretariat. This review, which was internal clearly, but you know, internal reviews have many merits, many of which are related to learning. And that was undertaken by the Secretariat and by Demetrio's team. And we found many merits to it. But we also had some concerns that we were able to share with Demetrio and the team, and I have to congratulate the team. They were absolutely fantastic about how responsive they were, how informative they were, and how open to thinking about SAP in a different way they have been throughout. We make many comments about that, but as I go on, I think I also want to congratulate the team and the rest of the GCF Secretariat on how well they have collaborated with us in terms of providing data and information, and have been so open in also sharing their concerns about this modality with us. And I think I can safely say on behalf of all of GCF that all of these evaluations represent a very, very salient effort by all of us together to be a learning institution, and which is what which is something that I do want to compliment the entire fund for. So importantly, we did undertake this initial assessment. I'm not going to be discussing that initial assessment here of the Secretariat's review. Very happy to discuss that during Q&A, but because of time, I'm only going to go over the key parts of the IEU's independent assessment of the SAP pilot, right? So the second part. Before I go on, I want to introduce the STAR team behind this overall report, and Yonji already spoke about it, but if you haven't seen it, this is the first copy of that report, really exciting. I definitely recommend that you pick it up, and yeah, very exciting to have it. But on the team, so the overall assessment was led by Daisuke Horikoshi, who's not here with us today, but very much part of the IEU team. Ilang Mogdano, who is here. Thank you, Ilang, for putting on your webcam and your camera. Claudio Volante, who's definitely here. And Claudio, at some point, if you could also put on your camera. And Margarita Gonzalez. And so this, we all constituted the author team of the SAP assessment, but to also underscore that there were a whole lot others who are sitting outside my room who were really important for playing very, very important roles in both the communication as well as the data part of the overall assessment. Okay, so the IEU's assessment of the SAP really focuses on 4 things, other than the critical assessment. It looks at the implementation of the SAP pilot. It examines the extent to which the SAP has currently been value added. It benchmarks the SAP pilot with other similar processes in other institutions. And then it consolidates learnings on how the SAP as a program modality may be improved. Importantly for our purposes, I'm not going to be talking about benchmarking because again, I'm constrained for time, but I'm going to focus on implementation, value added, and recommendations. Okay, So essentially to talk about portfolio, pipeline, and implementation. As of B.25, so as of the 25th meeting of the board that took place in March, most of the SAP projects till now are public, are not undertaken by the private sector. They're mostly constituted by grants, and they're mostly undertaken by international accredited entities. 13 funded proposals have so far been approved. The board approved $80 million for SAP. I think one marked element or attribute of the SAP program modality has been the huge demand for this modality, which is also illustrated by the fact that the GCF has currently contributed more than what was originally committed, which actually shows the demand for this modality, right? So currently committed $115 million. 5 of the overall 13 projects are from national direct access entities. And like I said, they're mostly public and adaptation focused. Not just that, there is an entire pipeline that is waiting to be supported by the SAP modality, which is again illustrative of the big demand for this overall program modality. Yeah. So currently, well, at the time of the writing of our report, and all of our data is valid as of the 25th meeting of the board, there was a pipeline. So there were 76 either funding proposals waiting to be considered by the Secretariat or concept notes waiting in the pipeline. Overall, if you were to think about the pipeline of the GCF, that is, these are projects or investments in waiting still to be approved by the board, SAP by itself, even though it's a small window, constitutes 1/5 or constituted 1/5 of the overall pipeline, right? So 20, more than 1/5, so 22%. A lot of these concept notes are from national direct access entities. Many of them are from Africa, mostly are cross-cutting. And although maybe one, and I can explain the maybe one in the current portfolio can be said to be a private sector one. And that is one of the concerns that we have raised in the overall assessment. 12 in the pipeline are from the private sector. Okay, moving on to implementation. What we are finding is that in terms of implementation, the projects that have been approved for funding through SAP are mostly aligned with the eligibility criteria that have been set together for the board. But, and there is a but, right? So firstly, they all comply with the $10 million and the low impact in terms of ESS criteria. That's good. But where they are still deficient is in using and adhering to this criteria of ready for scaling up. And we find saliently that projects or the interpretation of what is ready for scaling up or how that should be assessed by our Secretariat colleagues is still unclear, is used differently, and is thought of differently as well. Interestingly, even though it's an eligibility criterion, no projects that we could make out were excluded from funding from SAP based on the ready for scaling up criteria. Yeah, so that's important. Like I said, we found to our surprise, to a gentle surprise and positive surprise, that implementation has been supported by a small but very efficient and effective Secretariat team. And congratulations to Demetrio, who leads that team. The SAP team within the Secretariat has essentially been established and operationalized over a very quick timeline. Despite the fact that they are very small, they have developed extensive guidelines, online tutorials in multiple languages, and provided direct technical assistance to proponents on the SAP modality. And I do think that the responsiveness and the energy with which they have taken initiative in this space really is hugely creditable, and the report congratulates that. The online submission system that they have also supported has supported the simplification of processing proposals that are eligible for SAP. So that's all good. Now I basically look into whether SAP has really by itself represented an accelerated modality and a simplified modality, right? And what we're finding is that in terms of implementation, compared to similar size projects that are non-SAP, right? So less than 10 million, low environmental and social safeguards impact, we find that SAP projects themselves, so comparing apples with apples, has not produced a significant difference. So it's a 13% difference. Currently, project approval process projects, so PAP projects as against SAP projects, take approximately 399 days, and SAP projects take 365 days to go, and please watch my cursor, to go from concept note submission to approval, right? So it's not significantly shorter, and we think that there is some opportunity or low-hanging fruits there. Then we looked at simplification. Has SAP simplified the review process? And we find that there are, to its credit, there are specific templates that are being used for concept notes and for funding proposals that have been used that, for example, have fewer pages, have fewer annexes, etc., and additional guidance has also been provided. But simplification has not met lesser required information, and it is also, for SAP projects, what is still true is that all GCF policies and investment criteria are applicable. So for example, many proponents and many participants in this process, but also applicants who are potentially going to be supported, basically said that it took them almost more time to reduce overall FP proposals into SAP proposals because they had to spend a lot of time on brevity. And brevity, we all know, takes a lot of time. But also then to still provide the same kind of information in smaller templates that were required so that they could meet the information criteria that basically comes along as a requirement because they have to adhere to and support all GCF policies and investment criteria in the same way. So we are finding that the SAP pilot has not fully operationalized simplifications for after approval as well. So after board approval, FAA signing, for example, disbursement requirements, what will trigger disbursements, implementation, M&E requirements, these have also not been simplified. So leading up to board approval and even after. So what we are saying is overall, the SAP eligibility criteria should have entailed a lower level of risk and simpler preparation, just because that's the definition of SAP. But this is not translated into simplified requirements or accelerated processes. Then we looked at value added of SAP, and to what extent it was also leading to capacity development for agencies that wanted to access GCF. So go back then to the hypothesis that SAP represented, right? SAP was basically this idea of having a quick window where new agencies, especially who wanted to get familiar with GCF but couldn't afford to put in the investment, or were coming in for requirements of investments that were less than $10 million, so quite small compared to the average of $50 million, could come in quickly and get support. So both of those were, amongst many others, were the ideas that were there at the genesis of what SAP was intending to do. That is, bring in new types of agencies, give them experience with the GCF, etc. What we found is that most agencies that have come and utilized SAP have had previous experience with GCF, so they are not new. Many of the agencies have appreciated the direct technical assistance, but many of them have required additional experience as well and technical assistance, but there is very little space in the current space of modalities to provide this technical assistance. And neither PPF nor RPSP has succeeded in providing this, and we can talk about reasons. We also found that the private sector has not benefited largely from the SAP modality. I'm going to move on to recommendations. Okay, so we divided our recommendations into two sets. One set for the board, and then I have 3 slides basically for the Secretariat. So for the board, we are basically saying that the board should encourage and continue to help the Secretariat develop tailored processes for accelerating and simplifying the project cycle so that SAP can continue to respond to the guidelines that have been set up for the UNFCCC and the governing instrument. But to simplify review criteria for SAP, and this is really important because the burden of information remains almost equivalent, if not more, with SAP, primarily because applicants and proponents still have to produce the same kind of justification for investment. We're saying that should be different and those should be tailored in terms of as an investment criteria. We actually propose some of those. So we propose, for example, looking at implementation ability of the agencies. We propose looking at possible impact, climate rationale, and possibility for scaling up, right? So we propose some of those investment criteria in the report as well. So again, a pitch for the report. And then we also asking the board to consider delegating authority to the executive director for approving SAP type of projects. And again, we're arguing that actually this is not new to the GCF. Remember that the GCF already has precedence in terms of getting the executive director to approve investments. And this has been seen, for example, in PPF as well as with RPSP, or the Readiness and Preparatory Support Program. So there is that precedence and it should be used for SAP as well. We're going to go on to recommendations for the Secretariat. And so there are 3 slides, I think, here. For simplification, so they're divided into simplification, acceleration, and then overall capacity development, as well as incentivization. For simplification, we're saying simplified documentation requirements for particular proposals, especially for the SIDS and the LDCs, and especially where there are urgent climate impacts that are to be had. Yeah, and COVID especially makes this very salient. Second, enhanced clarity of guidance with consistent application, and this should especially be made consistent between ITAP and Secretariat. There were some examples, quite a few examples of also duplication or contradictory guidance coming. Third, we are saying better define key GCF concepts, climate rationale, as well as how these can be consistently measured and reviewed. And here we are saying focus on developing processes for post-approval as well that are SAP customized to SAP rather than imitating what is currently in the full funding proposal cycle. So both in terms of disbursement, triggering disbursement, monitoring and evaluation, reporting impact, etc. These should be customized to SAP because they are smaller, low impact proposals. Continuing, for acceleration, we're saying develop and enforce transparent and predictable business standards. So say how long it's going to take, let that be open, put that up and say we're going to process things within this period of time. That's the business standard. Consolidate the Secretariat's review process for both concept notes and funding proposals so that they're not getting different types of comments. So the applicants aren't getting different types of comments. Include capacity development program for small and fast approvals, especially to support direct access entities. You'll have noted that currently in the portfolio, actually the proportion of direct access entities is quite small, but I'm really looking forward to also our colleague from the Philippines talking about this. But predominantly, it's an international accredited entities coming in and accessing SAP. That has to be changed. That was one of the reasons as well that SAP was approved, that direct access entities could come in. But for that, capacity development is required. The Metro and its team are doing a really good job in providing whatever support they can, but much more is required, and that needs to be institutionalized much more strongly. And we're saying make eligibility criteria and processes for simplification and acceleration clearer, more predictable and transparent, as well as linked to how they contribute to the overall GCF mandate. Continuing for the Secretariat, there are 2 things that were there in the SAP board decision that have not yet been implemented. We're saying it's simplified financial terms and a robust monitoring system. That's an easy win. The Secretariat can and should do it. There's also ITAP should and can review on a rolling basis. The SAP team should use that because that's already board approved. And there is already an element of agreeing to making decisions between boards or in the absence of a full board meeting, and that should be used by SAP. And my last slide is really on capacity development for direct access entities that I spoke about, as well as developing a customized sub-strategy within SAP for the private sector. And last but not least, but something very close to my heart, we find that because the size of SAP is so small, there is very little incentive within the Secretariat staff, especially if you've got to really commit, to really think about SAP, because these are less than 10 million. So develop KPIs for the GCF that are SAP specific, so that it creates within the institution incentives for managers to really focus on SAP as well. And then focus on learning and developing evidence so projects are truly ready for scale up. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joe, for that exciting presentation. And as you were presenting, we were joined by a few more participants. So we now have 62 participants, and I know that we are joined by a number of accredited entities, board members, advisors, and we welcome you all to our side event. So now let us move to a quick panel discussion, building on the content of Joe's presentation just now. So once again, our panelists are Joe, the head of the IEU, and Prudencio or Prudy from the Land Bank of the Philippines, which is an accredited entity to the GCF, and Demetrio, the SAP manager at the GCF Secretariat. Thank you very much. So first of all, let me ask Prudy this question. So Prudy, based on your experience with the SAP and in the context of your SAP project, which is SAP 010, multi-hazard forecasting, multi-hazard impact-based forecasting and early warning system for the Philippines. Yes, in the context of this project, what do you think about the IEU's recommendation regarding the simplification and acceleration? So which parts of the recommendation would you emphasize the most?
Good afternoon and or good evening. So thank you.
You became muted again, Prudy.
Yeah. Good afternoon again and good evening to everyone. Thank you, GCF, for inviting Land Bank to this prestigious event of the GCF. So, of course, as you have mentioned, our project is the multi-hazard impact-based forecasting and early warning system. Just to give you an overview on how this project came about, this was approved last November 2019. So we started preparing this project in early January of 2019. So we were able to finally have this approved by the board after almost 11 months. So basically, this is a good example of a sub-project because, of course, by the nature of the project, it's category C. And of course, in terms of the scalability, it has the right condition of being totally replicable or in the whole country. But we have some concern also on the funding because, of course, the limit is $10 million. But of course, it's the cost of this project goes beyond $10 million. But of course, because of the support of the executing entity, we were able to still meet the requirement of the $10 million cap of the Green Climate Fund. So focusing on the earlier question, so of course we congratulate GCF for that very good report on how to simplify or accelerate this implementation of the SAP concept, and we particularly give focus based on our experience right now, because we pass on the process of preparing the concept note, the funding proposal, and eventually the approval of the funding proposal in a matter of 11 months. But of course, since December until now, we have yet to sign our funded activity agreement. But of course, we want to understand that this is a result of the current pandemic. But I think GCF also needs to look into this simplification after the approval of the the funding proposal, so that we can a bit shorten or focus on the implementation as soon as possible after the approval of this funding proposal. And I also would like to comment on of course, the simplification of the documents or the annexes in the funding proposal, because that's based on my experience as the Axis entity in the preparation of the funding proposal. We had a number of annexes that were required to support our funding proposal. And of course, from the very start, I thought that this simplified approval process is really simple, because I bank on the term simplified, so I thought that it's really simple, but in the end, it's not simple enough, because of course, while we say that these are shorter in terms of content, I think they are practically the same, but of course, in terms of the number of pages, maybe they are shorter than the usual project. But I think in terms of substance, I think the quality is still maintained by the GCF. So I don't know if my perception is correct, but these are one of the concern or areas that we had some difficulty in preparing the funding proposal last year. So like doing gender analysis or some feasibility study or all other those required attachment in the funding proposal. And we also support the proposal to, of course, to at least delegate the approval process from the board and to the executive director of the GCF. So I think that will be a welcome development, so that we can make this simplified approval process really simple in its real sense. So so that we can, of course, get more quality projects from the GCF. And I would also like to share my observation, because we are getting some queries on from a number of project proponents in the country, and they are asking us what are the modes of access. We are telling them it's one way is the simplified approval process, which is the more simple way of accessing the GCF. But we told them usually that we prefer doing the regular way, because of course we already experienced how the SAP has been implemented by Land Bank, so we don't see much difference in the SAP and the regular project, the PAP. But in one of my conversations with a funding proponent, so they mentioned that no, their project is really a SAP. It's really a design for a SAP project, because sometimes if you tell them that that's the easiest way to access the GCF, sometimes they tend to retrofit a regular project into a SAP project. So that means they have to reduce the amount to $10 million. That means they have to forego some activities or reduce some budget, or they have to get away from other activities that will result to it being a class category C project. So I believe that the IEU should also come up with this consideration to check if a sub project is really a natural sub project, not a retrofitted sub project, because in the end it will result to poor performance, because anything that is retrofitted usually redound to lower efficiency or lower effectiveness. So that's my point, and as I mentioned, I do agree with most of the recommendations of the IA. Thank you.
Thank you, Prudy, for sharing with us your observations and experience. It's really useful for us to hear your experience with the SAP. So maybe I could ask Dimitri to come in at this point. So, you know, Prudy mentioned the need for further simplifying the documentation requirements, but also what happens after the project is approved. So Demetrio, what is your take on that?
Well, thank you, Yonji. And well, I cannot start without really thank you. And this is not courtesy bias, Joe, Claudio, Daisuke, you, Helang, all the team in IU. And this is not courtesy bias, but it's really good for us that IU, and we were lucky, decided in fact to take upon the assessment of the SAP with independent eyes, because you did it in a very pragmatic way. And let me say that those recommendations that Joe presented are very actionable, and that's what's really matter for us. And I can tell you that, as Prudy said, basically we agreed on, I would say, all the recommendations from the IU independent assessment of the SAP, and we also provided management response. It's very timely. Also, you did an exceptional job because it arrived really at the right time for us to put these actions that follow your recommendations in our work plan, to immediately take action to, as much as we can as Secretariat, and I will come back to this, to improve the SAP and the efficiency for the direct tax entities and for the countries. So we are already putting those action in our work plan for next year, basically all of them, and we are currently in the phase of costing and putting the or requesting the budget resources that will be needed, at least for those recommendations that are targeted to the Secretariat. There will be the address, not sometime, who knows when, but in our next year work plan. So really it was not only very relevant recommendations, actionable, but also very timely relevant. And I know that this required a big effort on your sides, a lot of nights probably where you didn't sleep to arrive to give us this in a time that was very sensitive for us in order to take immediate action. So really also thank you very much from that. What Prudy said, it's an element of reflection, and let me start from this point, and it was also highlighted by the IEU assessment. The simplified approval process, in order to be more simplified, needs action. Of course, on our side, as Secretariat, as SAP team, on the side of the divisions that deals with project in the GCF, mitigation, adaptation, private sector facility, but it needs also the board to consider a new SAP policy that we intend to bring to the board. Actually, the board asked at the last board meeting in Geneva this policy that will not be tabled next week in the virtual B.26 board meeting. We hope for B.27, and we took this recommendation for IEU for them because we need also the board to help us to make the SAP a real SAP, and especially in terms of approval. If I reply to the same question as Prudy said, I think one of the most important things is to change the approval process, the delegated authority to the executive director. Also, in our opinion as Secretariat, it's a very relevant element to make the SAP different from the PAP and more efficient, especially for the SEEDs and least developed countries. And in relation to the post-approval, overall, we have been, well, the board decided the SAP should apply exactly the same policies that applies to the PAP to the SAP, with, if you want, the exception that we can discount some elements from the feasibility study, but it's not what proved to be probably the game-changing element. And in this sense, what we are trying to do and we are working on that, and this is also something touched upon by IEU as an action that we should do, on how we enter faster in the signature and effectiveness of the funded activity agreement, FAA. What Prudy just mentioned is a challenge for them. We are basically setting up a system that we hope we can start to pilot by the end of this year or next year which is called the term sheet generator. It means that basically we will advance the negotiation, especially with the entities like Land Bank that already had a SAP approved by the board, and an FAA that has been already negotiated with the lawyers of the Secretariat. We will start from that model in order to basically arrive to the stage that when the board or the executive director, if this will be the case, will approve that SAP, we can indeed immediately enter into a fast signature. Fast signature of the FAA means that we can get into the first disbursement rapidly. Also, building on what you suggested, we are looking at how we make a more robust monitoring system, which is associated, of course, to the reporting part, which is the basis for the disbursements. So we look at aspects that were touched upon the IEU assessment, maybe how we make the reporting system more performance-based so that we have more quantifiable or key performance indicator, results-based, if you want, monitoring and evaluation system that can allow us to lower the burden of reporting and speeding up the disbursement during the implementation phase. These are all actions that we have already undertaken. It's also, there is a business process component with the information and technology department and with the lawyers. So it's not only us, but we have started, and I hope we can offer this service as soon as early next year. I stop here.
Thank you very much, Demetrio. Joe, now, do you want to quickly comment on any of the points raised by Demetrio or Prudy?
No, I just, I don't know whether I should respond to actually one of the questions that came up on the chat room, or whether I should wait for.
Yeah, we will do that in Q&A. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think we are in a very luxurious situation where we are all agreeing that yes, there needs to be greater simplification, greater acceleration. But I think the challenge of this entire programmatic modality is how can we really translate what is the vision, the private sector engagement, bringing in new types of agencies into the GCF system, familiarizing them, and for the agencies that are already interested in working with GCF, how it can be simplified and accelerated, and whether, and this is something I didn't allude to as much, but I really would like to hear Demetrio and Prudy's thoughts perhaps during Q&A, is innovation. One of the things that we found in the FPR as well, in the forward-looking performance review, was that although the GCF in its overall thinking does think about innovation, which is also mentioned in the governing instrument, modalities themselves are not targeting innovation as a key, as an end goal. And that's important because if the GCF wants to bring about a paradigm shift, it has to start to think about innovation and scaling up all at the same go. And the GCF is large enough that it can look at the entire spectrum of projects that go from innovation, which are traditionally going to be small, to large scaled up projects which are megaliths but have large impact, right? You can look at the entire spectrum of projects going from innovation to large impact and paradigm shifting ones. But SAP could possibly be this modality through which innovation can be supported. It's not there. And it needs to be a modality that can really embrace that idea and spirit of innovation and climate change, because if GCF doesn't do it, who will? And that's something I do want to engage Demetrio and Prudy, and hopefully the rest of the audience on as well. Thanks.
Thank you very much for that. Yes, indeed, we will come back to this idea of innovation and scaling up. Maybe I could ask Prudy one more question really briefly. So Prudy, the IEU also recommends enhancing the capacity building mechanism of SAP. So as an accredited entity, what is your take on this? Do you have anything further to add or suggest? What kind of capacity building support do you think would be very useful to accredited entities? Really briefly, please. And please unmute yourself.
Yeah, of course, every capacity building activity is a welcome support to us. In my experience, during preparation, of course, capacity building can be focused on the required annexes to be prepared to together with the funding proposal. So if you can help us develop a good logical framework, a good theory of change or gender analysis and all other annexes, then it would really facilitate preparation of a good sub proposal. Yeah, I think that's the simplest thing that I can share on this aspect. Yeah, thank you.
And Dimitrio, we were very curious as to what your take is on the idea of developing SAP-specific KPIs for the Secretariat so that your team or other relevant Secretariat teams could be incentivized to process more projects through the SAP modality. What is your take on this idea?
Well, maybe I will come later to the point of innovation that John made that is very important, absolutely. And I think even behind the SAP for the Green Climate Fund in general and the project it is financing and it intends to finance. Yunji, on the point of the KPIs, I can't agree more. Of course, well, it's like we are not assuming that our colleagues that in fact are very stretched, especially in this period, the COVID-19 and the current situation where some colleagues has left the GCF, especially in the public sector divisions where the most of the SAP are and the most of GCF funding proposal. But of course, if we have KPIs that can be reflected as targets of the organization and of the individuals, of course, we create motivation to be engaged with the SAP and probably motivation to also understand that you have to look at the SAP with the lens of a simplified approval process, not with the lens of a project that asks maybe $500 million from the Green Climate Fund and imply very high risk and impacts in terms of environmental and social risk for the populations or for the environment. Said that, I'll be honest, I think, and also this is touched upon the IEU assessment, we also have to think a little bit laterally if maybe a different review system within the Secretariat specifically for the SAP that allow more capacity to be surged for reviewing SAP proposal should be in place. Maybe using more the use of external consultant or firms that give us that speed and that capacity, because this is in general, but since the expectation for a SAP is that the review goes faster, and as Joe presented, the pipeline, it's quite robust of the SAP. It's growing even, so it's more 22-23%. So it's really relevant. So a reflection. It's surely the KPIs will help. Sure, it will help if we have a specific different review modality, and that we are realistic on the capacity that the Secretariat and the ITAP as well needs in order to increase the amount of SAP that can be reviewed within 1 year. Especially, and I finish here, think about if the recommendation of IEU to get delegated authority to the Executive Director is accepted by the board. It means that fortunately for the countries and for the direct access entities, we can process in 1 year more SAPs, simply because you don't have to wait the next board meeting in order for your project to be approved. And if that is the case, of course, it means as well that we need the appropriate capacity to, in the same time frame, to review, to appraise more SAPs, both the Secretariat and the ITAP, in order for that for the expectation of the countries to be fulfilled. I stop here again. Over to you.
Thank you. Due to the limited time, we will now move straight to our Q&A, open to everyone. So I see a question from the floor. Jana, yeah, we have this question. Her question is whether the GCF is considering SAP 2.0 to open up to ESS category B projects and programs, still under $10 million US, as the types of projects one can design to fit the ESS category is in some sectors limited. So that's the question probably for Dimitrio. Would you like to answer that question?
Well, we have considered this aspect, and it's probably one of the things that I think the internal Secretariat review presented at the last board meeting, and IEU, not that they disagreed, but they didn't find really the full agreement. I don't even say full agreement, but let's say, let's start, Jana, and greetings to you. I hope you are well. The board has asked in the SAP B.26 decision that the review of the SAP consider if to expand the activities that can be eligible. So expanding the activities that can be eligible can only be done if you accept a little bit more risk. So we have indeed, at least us here, that, okay, if you expand the activities, probably the SAP is more appealing for the private sector, because most of private sector are not really a category C project. They normally target category B, I2 at least, well, if not category A normally. And we also have a few comments back, especially from those direct access entities that deal with indigenous people, or they have good climate projects that deal with conservation areas. The moment in which you touch indigenous people by our ESS framework and indigenous people policy, the moment in which you operate in conservation areas, of course, normally the level of risk that has to be monitored normally put that project in category B. So while the SAP can be an occasion and let's say a good occasion for this type of project to serve these beneficiaries in these areas and indigenous people, they are prevented if it's classified as B. So I can no comment, because Jana and colleagues, you have to wait the SAP policy to see the publication, to see if this will be a surprise, it will be proposed. But of course, we are considering also based on the request of the board, if maybe excluding the non-risk factors, the SAP should include some limited risk that can be expanded into the category B. And for the 10 million, I think that there is no really much evidence, and IEU can expand on that, will motivate us to raise that amount as the Green Climate Fund contribution limit. I just want to remind one thing, the SAP limit is not 10 million, it's the contribution from the GCF. With the co-finance, the project can go above this limit of 10 million.
Absolutely right. Yes. Thank you for correcting that, Dimitri.
Okay, and I think Kamal has a question. Kamal, do you want to come in? Kamal raised his hand.
Yes, thank you. I'm very pleased in webinar. Do you hear me?
Yes, we hear you. Yeah. Go ahead.
Is it fine? Yeah. I would like to thank Dimitriou, Puri, Puri, and also the Philippine accredited entity. The first comment would be about this evaluation. How can we consider such evaluation as a full evaluation when it's just a phase, the first pilot phase of the SAP, when we know that if according to the project cycle, there's still steps of the project cycle that are not evaluated. For example, the implementation, the results, so on. There's some parts of the cycle which is not yet finished, if we consider that the objective is to mitigate emissions and to have some adaptation results. The other thing, SAP or any other activity at the GCF needs capacity building. However, the problem between SAP and regular FP's process, funding proposals cycle, project cycle, is that when you use the same modalities, when you need the procedures and modalities, that may be to say that capacity building will solve the situation and will be enough. It will be good work towards speeding the process when speeding up the process will not be linked only to innovation. Speeding up.
Okay, Kamal, I think he dropped out. Joe, maybe you could still come on in on this question. You could react to this question. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the first question that Kamal asked was, well, how is it a full evaluation if we haven't looked at all parts of the cycle? Actually, Kamal noticed that it's actually called the independent assessment of the GCF simplified approval process. And we chose that name carefully to also then caveat the overall process, the overall assessment by saying that, look, this is a pilot. It's a very, very young portfolio. Many of the projects actually haven't even been signed as FAs, etc. And very important then, really to understand, and this is the whole point of pilots, that we want to learn very quickly from them. So we, like Demetrius said as well, we have actually done this in record speed time, just so that we could help the Secretariat to think strategically about the SAP, right? But the idea is to learn from pilots and to become bigger, better, and smarter as you go along. And so that's why it's not a full evaluation. We are completely cognizant that we are not looking at implementation because projects, and we are not looking at results because it's too early to say that. But that doesn't mean that learning can't occur before that. That's why it's an assessment. I'm not sure I got the questions on the other questions that Kamal asked. The line, at least in my room, was really bad. But I was also thinking that Faith and Paul's questions were quite good, and Yonji, if you wanted to consider them. Thanks.
Yes, yes. Let me ask Paul's question. So he loves the idea of the SAP being an innovation incubator, but it would need to be, it would need to have a faster approvals process so that it can work efficiently. Do you want to comment on that, Demetrio, really quickly? And Joe, yes?
After
Joe
Demetrio. After
okay.
Demetrio. I know he had a comment on innovation, so after Demetrio.
Well, maybe it's a little bit aligned to what Paul asked. Well, I agree. I mean, of course, look, I think in the new SAP policy and based also on the reflections that IEU has just said with Joe and written down on the concept of innovation and scale up, there should be also some reflection about what the SAP want from the criterion ready to be scaled up. When the board approved the SAP pilot scheme back at the end of 2017, I wasn't around. I was in a kind of sabbatic assignment at the World Meteorological Organization. So I can only think that one of the reasons why one of the criterion that is, as IEU presented in the introduction, wasn't really easy sometimes to really assess or to really make the case if a project it's uppable or not based on that criterion, was in fact to de-risk, if you want, even further the SAP compared to the PAP, to the regular projects. Because if you scale up something that from an evaluation, from the experience has proved to work, of course, there is the implementation risk during the implementation phase of that project or program. But at the same time, exactly, there is a requirement for innovation. There is an expectation that if GCF, in fact, put a relatively low amount compared to its average project, it does that to the risk its larger project that can come after the SAP project has been implemented and properly evaluated. And at that point, it's really clear that SAP, especially for the private sector, can have a role as incubator / accelerator. And I agree again with Paul with the fact that if this is the vision, and I think it should, we need the speed of approval and as IEU recommended in their report. Over.
Joe, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry. So, you know, in my other life, I also teach. So please forgive me for this. You know, what is important is to recognize that everybody wants everything from SAP. And so on one side, you want the speed and acceleration. Sorry, you can't see my print, but you want the speed and acceleration. Then you want the private sector to come in. And then you also want innovation to come in. So these are three pretty big objectives, right? And the first rule of public policy is one policy, one objective. But what you want to really do is to try and get everything from SAP. Fine, acknowledge it. First, let's acknowledge that you want the speed and acceleration, but speed and acceleration you should use for the plain vanilla, non-innovative projects, but then use SAP to scale up. So where you're being really speedy and accelerated, these are low impact projects, use that to scale up, but then have the evidence to show that these are scalable projects. The other part of SAP could be, okay, bring in the private sector. But for the private sector, and Demetrio pointed this rightly, only GCF's contribution is 10 million, but you know, there's a whole lot of other things that are allowed. There are many things that the private sector would love to see. There, use SAP to help initiate the private sector into GCF. I'm less worried about speed and acceleration there, but I'm definitely far more interested in seeing where they can be innovative and where then the private sector can be handheld literally to engage with the GCF. So there the objective should be slightly different. There you're looking at innovative projects where the private sector comes in. You also look at ESG, so environmental, social, and governance, things that can be used and achieved through SAP. And then you have the innovation incubator idea, right? And that's completely different. There, the focus has to be on learn, 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 redo. And there, you know, you really have to think about how can we, it should be easy come, but ready to implement very quickly. But the key focus on those in those projects should be about learning, and they should be sort of, you know, the Elon Musks of the climate world. That's what you should be looking at, but you should put in the money. Think about that. And I'm not going to tell Demetrio or the Secretariat, this is what you should do. But clearly, these are three really compelling objectives that SAP can and should be able to deal with. But what you then want in SAP as a modality is slightly different. And the first thing that a strategy has to do is to build that vision. You can't put all 15 things into the vision. You have to say, is it the private sector? Is it innovation? Is it scale up? And then design the rest of the process. Thanks.
Thank you very much. We have exhausted our time, but there is one more question. And if you don't mind, we can quickly address this question from David. So the assessment will certainly help improving the SAP mechanism. I'm wondering what activity is done aside from capacity building to support the direct access entities in the SAP? Is there, for example, an internal guideline on prioritizing the DAEs? Demetrio, do you want to answer the question?
Yes, no, thank you, David. Absolutely, I was even reading your question. And also the second part. Okay, what we are doing, and I think you also recommended that, it's not only capacity building. We indeed are working with the project preparation facility, and we are almost there to provide a devoted technical assistance service that we can fastly deliver to to the accredited entities, specifically to the direct access entity. They will be our priority. We actually already try to do our best. For example, Prudi might mention that I think he received some support from us, from the SAP team and the Secretariat with a consultant that have also supported the funding proposal delivery. And this technical assistance should be a bit different from the classic project preparation facility grant, which is more complex to ask, which is timely to process, which is also coming with administrative cost or in terms of time for the accredited entity to manage and to then report and so on. It's a technical assistance that is supposed to work on the last mile, exactly because many direct access entity, accredited entity might have already done scaling up a phase 1 of an adaptation fund project, of GF project, and then they bring it to GCF and they want a SAP because they want to quickly continue a phase 2 of their project. So they already have the technical studies, the feasibilities, that type of studies that we need. But what they need is someone that help them packaging the funding proposal with the information that the GCF and the ITAP needs to see, and presented how the GCF reviewers and the ITAP needs to see in order to assess and bring that one to the board. So we are working on this type of technical assistance, and we hope that by the end of the year, and this is again in line with the IEU recommendations, we can have these as a mainstream process that we are able to offer to the direct access entity. And by the way, we, as Prudi my comment now, we already did. And just very quickly, because I saw, it's true that we have to do more with SAP, with direct access entity, but I want to tell you good news, at least for us on the SAP. If you compare the pipeline of the SAP to the PAP, 50% of the pipeline, it's from direct access entity. And this is a value that I don't remember the PAP, but it's higher than the regular one. So somehow the direct access entity believes that the SAP it's at least a good entry point to GCF finance for them. Over to Prudi and Joe if they want to complement.
Okay, Prudi, did you want to react?
Yeah, no, more on our part, because we are a beneficiary of this SAP modality. So we, of course, I would like to thank GCF for giving us this opportunity to access the GCF through SAP. And of course, we learned a lot during the entire process of the SAP application. But of course, this forum is a good venue also to further enhance this good modality of the GCF. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And if I may, I'm sorry, I missed Faith's question earlier. And if we could address that question, which requirements can be removed from the SAP funding proposals to make the preparation more simple? Maybe Joe, do you want to take a first crack at it?
Yeah, only because, and it was an exciting question because it also spoke to some of the things that we do lay out. We actually talk about changing the criteria for SAP proposals, which is not to say that they shouldn't be considered, but they should just be basic entry criteria. But quality of SAP, what should be funded and what shouldn't be, and we make this distinction. What is desirable and what is entry requirement? They have to be partitioned. So things like country alignment, all of the SAP projects, all of the FPs in the GCF are completely country aligned. All that, you know, a lot of this is no objection letters from the NDAs, etc. They're not really giving you a quality assessment on the proposal. So our recommendation, which we've made now in the FPR as well, is think about what are minimum criteria, but your minimum criteria cannot be criteria that you assess the quality of your proposals on. That's just entry. We'll consider you now, right? So country ownership, country needs, clearly eligibility, but not quality. What is quality? Innovation, implementation feasibility, scaling up, ready for scale up, and climate rationale. Those are the 4 things that we are suggesting should become quality criteria. That is, you've made the eligibility, but now on the strength of this, we're going to consider you for funding. I do want to pitch, if you don't have time to look at our 100-page evaluation, which of course you should, because that's fantastic, do look at our 1-page evidence tree. It's really exciting. It'll tell you everything we want to say. And Demetria, we're going to directly deliver this personally to your desk because you haven't seen it, but I think it'll be useful. But yeah, so Faith, thanks for asking that question. We are definitely recommending that the board and the Secretariat think a lot about what are minimum criteria, which are eligibility, and what are required criteria that can help to assess quality of proposals. Thanks.
Thank you very much. We've exhausted all our times, but we still have 42 participants with us. So thank you very much for joining us and staying with us until the very end. And I see Claudio, one of the SAP evaluation authors, with us. Maybe Claudio, do you want to come in and say a few words?
Wow, thank you, Yonji. But no, I think that there's been a great discussion, and very happy to have participated in this review, and looking forward to Dimitri's and the board's discussion on how to, what it is, the purpose, to deal with the urgent climate crisis that we're suffering today, and countries need the financing. The GCF needs to become more accessible. There's no question about it. And the SAP provides, or the concept of simplification and acceleration provides a great window to deal with these urgent needs from the country. So I'm not going to add any more. The evaluation and the report says it all. So thank you.
Thank you for that. So if no further questions from the floor, from any of you, I think we will close this exciting side event here. Thank you very much to all our panelists, our excellent panelists, for that very interesting conversation. And many thanks to all of you who joined us today for this B.26 side event by the IEU. We hope you, stay with us, connected with us through various other means. Just to let you know, the IEU also launched its new podcast series called The Evaluator. And this podcast is available on Spotify, Anchor, and on the IEU website, on Apple, any of the major platforms that you may use to listen to podcasts. So check it out. It's really exciting. And we will be sharing with you our communications products featuring the SAP findings and recommendations through our website as well. So thank you very much for joining us, and we will see you soon. Thank you, and we wish you a very successful B.26 as well. Bye.
Thank you, Anjali. You're a great moderator. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Excellent. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Congrats to all of you,
Thank
Joe.
you, Purdy,
Bye.
and thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.